Oh, when it comes to the Raimi Spider-Man trilogy, people are always talking about, Spider-Man 4 and their own different versions of that. But I always thought, out of any of the different film series, this was probably the one that made the most sense to have. I call it tie-in supplementary material and stuff that's set in between each film, specifically something that would be set in between the second and third movie, because there's a lot of stuff that happens in that, I believe it's a year, that never really gets addressed or talked about in the films all that much. Like, for example, a core part of Spider-Man 2's story is Peter's inability to balance his superhero life with his personal life, and how they often conflict with each other and just cause him to be very miserable. And the third film, while not showing him struggling with this anymore, never actually explains or addresses, how does he now properly manage time for both? Does he create some kind of shift where he does it, goes out as Spider-Man once every 2 or 3 days? Does, he do it once every 10 hours? It's not something that really gets explained. And that, again, it's like, it's not that important for the story of 3, admittedly, but it still is a component of the previous movie that you'd be surprised to just see not really get addressed at all. There's also the matter of his relationship with Mary Jane, where a lot of people, tend to see her as the weakest of the Spider-Man love interest in terms of character. I always said that a character can only be as strong as the writing that they're given, and it's like, you only get to see her and Peter as a couple throughout that entire trilogy for the first part of Spider-Man 3 before they're broken up. And because we're given so little material of them actually being a happy couple, a lot of people, call the relationship toxic and whatnot. And it would be interesting to kind of see the events between 2 and 3 from her perspective, in terms of, the second one ending on that shot of her looking out the window at Peter as he's going into, save the day with concern, and kind of just depicting, what was the arc in terms of accepting that the risk of being with someone that actively puts themselves in danger. Because again, the fact that it's been a year, right, between 2 and 3 at a minimum, shows that they were able to be happy together for some time, but the events of the third film really start to put a wedge in their relationship. And it would be nice to have some conflict, between the Raimi Spider-Man and one of his established villains from the comics, where they're not trying to, use Mary Jane as some damsel. It would be cool to kind of break up that tradition. I should also say this, this is probably the part that makes me want an interquel between 2 and 3 the most, which is Harry's arc. So I have said before, I do not like trilogies, and when I say that, I always have to clarify, I'm not saying I dislike a trilogy or 3 movies simply because they're 3 movies, right? I like the Dark Knight trilogy, well, the first 2 anyway, Back to the Future, etc. Rather, I feel like some writers will have an idea of a character arc, and because they're confined to 3 movies, they try to cram everything into those 3 films, when they might have been better suited letting it be something that marinated for one more movie. And Harry's arc, again, you get what it is on paper, right? First movie, friends with Peter unabashedly, develops his hatred for Spider-Man. Second one kind of builds it up more, the revelation that Peter is Spider-Man and his conflicted emotions about it. But then by the third one, he's, the start of the third one, nonetheless, he is ready to exact revenge in his dad's name. And I guess what I'm getting at is there's a lot that needs to happen to go from I can't kill him, he's my best friend, to you knew this was coming, Pete, right? There's a lot that has to occur between those 2 statements to not make them feel like they're coming from 2 different characters. Now, the way I would play this out, again with this interquel, is initially Peter is very forthcoming to Harry with, all the lies, just explaining to him, how long he's had his powers, the full extent of what he can do. And Harry initially, he's kind of nodding his head. He's believing him. Again, he doesn't want to think that his friend is his father's killer. He doesn't want to believe that, he's the reason he's had this, broken home life for the last few years. And over the course of this, we'll call it a novel for now, right? You would really see Harry start to unravel, right? He's getting those hallucinations of Norman telling him, you can't just buy into this crock that he's selling you, can you? Just really continuing to egg him on to suspect and think other things. And you would have him talk to people like his butler, like hell, even Aunt May, and just speak to them and sort of vent his frustrations about Peter and why does he get these abilities and seemingly a happy life while I'm sitting here miserable with all this money, and just again that resentment that was already there in the second film when he got drunk would just keep festering and building up to where by the end of this you would see him again not actually be physically aggressive or a villain strictly in this you know little installment between 2 and 3, but I would end it with a portion of it like his arc in terms of this installment with him like holding the sword or essentially reaffirming his dad's ideas after struggling with the concept of turning on Peter. And again, that's a big motivator for me wanting an interquel because it's such a big jump in terms of his motivations that I really think if they just had one more movie, it would make a lot more sense. Now, in terms of who would be the villain, I can say definitively who would not be the villain, right? So obviously, Goblin and Ock are deceased. You can't use Venom or Sandman because they're saved for the third film. I would not use Vulture, Lizard, or Kraven because in my mind those would be the different villains for 4, 5, and 6. So it would have to be, it could be someone like Electro. Have some conflict where he's trying to shut down New York's power supply. Just again something a little bit more lower stakes than the second film, because I kind of want to hammer home the idea that there are threats from supervillains, right? Because you can kind of tell by the third film that Raimi Spider-Man is very experienced and has dealt with multiple villains before, but not every one of those threats is this like world-ending or I guess city-ending, catastrophe. Some guys just they're around, they make a little bit of a threat, but they don't like disrupt everything too much. But yeah, it's one of those series that really should have more material and stuff that's set in between each installment because there's a lot to work with. And you can call it superfluous. I'm mainly interested in just telling a good story, so that was just me rattling off some of my ideas.